Good morning. I'm 2 minutes late, so apologies. I was reading over my notes and just lost track of time. And by reading, still typing and editing, very last minute. So, good morning. It's June 11th, 2020. Welcome to Sociality Squared's Director's Cut Facebook Live. I appreciate you joining live. I really didn't promote this too much, so there's probably not too many people right this second. So whether you're joining live at any point during today's broadcast or watching the recording, I appreciate you taking time out of your day and sharing it with me. We're in week 12 of lockdown, and I don't even know if we're technically in lockdown anymore because, or I should probably come up with a better word. But we're still in the middle of a pandemic, and New York City is actually in phase one of reopening. However, there's a lot of coronavirus spikes and cases across the United States, and we've now surpassed 115,000 people in the United States who have died from coronavirus, and the projections are really, really worrisome. So, as I say with every broadcast since I've started, my heart is with your heart. And as I said last week, my heart is especially with the Black community right now. One of the webinars I recently watched, which I'll mention a little bit later, Susan Jane, who's a diversity educator, speaker, and trainer, just kind of honed in on the fact that so many of the Black community, this is just a moment of pain and grief, and that we just have to keep that in mind in terms of I went through a lot of personal grief last year, and it meant so much when people reached out, but also the text that started, you don't have to respond, and not putting any burden on me in that time. And even though it's two totally different things, completely totally different things, but my team gave me space and I appreciated it so much. And we should do that with our Black friends. I know that you're hurting, and my heart is with your heart, and for everyone else, treat it as grief. So as many people watching this probably know, saw that I protested last week, and then I got tested and went to self-quarantine until I got my test results, which they came back negative, which is a good or bad thing about the antibody test. But I encourage everyone to stay vigilant in terms of getting tested, wearing your mask, and practicing social distancing. Last week, I discussed humility and staying vigilant on social media, and today I want to talk about finding clarity through action. Before I go into this, I kind of went off script a little bit since last week, and this past couple of weeks have been even heavier on my heart than coronavirus. I did want to announce one quick Sociality Squared news tonight for Xavier, the Xavier Alumni Association. Christy, who's on the team, I actually met her as in college. We were, what was it, sophomore or junior? Oh goodness, I should know this. Roommates, and now we work together. But anyway, we met at Xavier University, and she's now the head of the alumni chapter in Cincinnati and on the national board. And we are co-leading or co-hosting an alumni networking event tonight. So if there's any Xavier alums who are watching, do join. It will be hopefully some levity and fun to the backdrop of what's going on, but if it's real connection and more depth in the connections to have a safe space to talk about what's going on, it's there for that too. Um, Other S2 news, I didn't type that part up. Um, I am doing uh, another workshop coming up, but anyway, I didn't prep for that. So follow us on social media and sign up for our newsletter to stay up on all the latest news. Okay, so I want to spend a little bit more time on the topic of finding clarity through action. So, what do I mean by this? Um, Being in quarantine this past week and just trying to follow as many conversations as I can, there's just a lot of confusion, or not confusion. Everyone just kind of asking how do I show up, and among my white friends, it's what do I do? Some people, they've explored their whiteness before. To others, this is a very new concept. I know, actually, uh, I said on stage last year at South by Southwest, I was the only white person on the panel that I put together and moderated to an audience of 300, 400 people at South by Southwest, that white people need to do the work. And it was very terrifying for me to say that due to my own white fragility and all the things that come with that. But I'm glad that I did, because everyone's kind of starting to have these conversations. And I think it was 2018 for Social Media Week. The the theme for that year was with great responsibility, or with great power comes great responsibility. And Dylan, who has been doing this work for 20 years and is amazing in terms of identity work and his intersectional approach of our integrated approach of health, wellness, and identity. And he and I, largely from his encouragement, and Dunal put together a panel that we proposed on Let's Talk About Whiteness. When you see across the board the decision makers, largely in media companies and CEO positions, in all forms of leadership, are white men and white people who don't understand their own whiteness and therefore have a lot of blind spots about racism and all of this, sexism, all the isms, that we wanted to talk about it. It did not get selected, so maybe they will select it. But to me, it was just, it was an organization that I don't know how diverse they are, because they don't actually show all of the photos of their team. But with with such a sorry, this is a little bit of a rant. With the title of with great power comes great responsibility, we just have to talk about whiteness. But what I mean, if this is new or it's uncomfortable, and if you're hearing this and you're like, oh God, what are you saying, Helen? I invite you to get curious about your feelings. Like, why do you feel that way? I know I was very uncomfortable. It's still a little scary because I'm by no means an expert and have so much work to do on my own journey on this. But I invite you to get curious about that. And then one thing, kind of what I wanted to hone in on today about finding clarity through action. There's a great quote that Gloria Steinem said at one of the talks I saw with her in New York City, when we still had events, where someone asked in the audience, what should I do? And her response was like, don't worry about what you should do what you can. And I think that's something that we can all kind of resonate. And I'll give a few tips in a few minutes about some starter points. And I apologize to our Black viewers. This is a little geared towards white people. But I think you can find the meaning of finding clarity across the board. And I practice this myself. This is kind of what my one little mantra this year, whether it's for our personal selves, our professional selves, or even social media. Sometimes in doing you find clarity, because we can get so stuck in our heads about, what to do and then never actually do something. With social media, we often say, as well informed as our strategies are, our content plans and our content pillars, part of it is, we say this all the time, is like throwing spaghetti against a wall and seeing what sticks. For what sticks, continue to optimize it. For what doesn't stick, let that fade away. And I think that's something that we can do in our personal lives, in terms of not everyone can protest. I didn't realize that for so many reasons. And taking action everyone has so many different gifts to offer, and different perspectives, and there's not one right way to do it. So, exploring different ways, testing which way resonates best with you, is throwing spaghetti against the wall and seeing what sticks. I'm also a big believer in personal and professional development, and one of the things, for a sales course I'm taking right now, one of the things that was mentioned is that sometimes you need to get out of your head and act your way into thinking differently than think your way into acting differently. So what do I mean by that, or what was meant by that? Like, one example, I speak on stage, and I do more panels, so I don't have, over the years, I still get nervous speaking when it's just me, and that's something I have to work on. But how do I work on it is I put in the practice. I work with coaches, and I just do it. And by doing it more and more, I get more and more comfortable doing it, and it gets less scary. And if you're uncomfortable talking about whiteness, and I get it, it's scary, depending on where you are on this journey, then you start doing something about it, and start with researching and reading, or just sitting with your feelings and exploring it, and talking to your other white friends and family, in safe spaces. And in doing so, it gets less scary. And me talking about it on this broadcast, it gets a little less scary for me to continue to do it. I also was thinking about this, how I've always kind of just thought about comfort zones, and widening comfort zones. I love travel for that reason. I love some extreme sports for that reason, where if you think of your comfort zone, I don't know if you can see me, like, is this like one little circle around you that you live in, and every time you do something uncomfortable, it widens a little bit further. And then you keep on pushing and getting out of your comfort zone, and your circle just keeps on getting wider and wider and wider. And pretty soon, you've pushed your comfort zone so far, things become a whole lot less scary. But in order to get there, you have to keep on doing uncomfortable things. For me, that's, speaking on stage, jumping out of an airplane, doing skydiving. That's really scary, but after doing that, and actually the one thing I really like about extreme sports like that is that's so scary. I jumped out of an airplane to go skydiving, that all these other things too that I thought were scary in my comfort zone, it gives it a little bit other perspective. Well, maybe it's not actually that scary. I jumped out of an airplane. I can talk on stage. So I encourage you, at least this is a tool that's worked for me, of thinking about my little comfort zone, and like how good it feels to widen it, and how in the discomfort I'm widening my level of comfort too, and things become less scary. So I mentioned just a few action steps, because I'm a doer, and I like action steps of what to do. This is geared a little bit more towards white folks. First of all, take a deep breath. You are okay. It is going to be okay. You're not going to figure this out overnight. This is a lifelong process of learning, unlearning, realizations, getting new perspectives. So give yourself some grace. I mentioned this last week. We all need to give each other, ourselves and each other, a whole lot of grace. So that's the first thing. Take a deep breath. I'm going to screw up. I'm going to continue to screw up, but I'm going to keep showing up. So I encourage you to think that way too. And then start with yourself, of just like reflection, like what do you actually believe in? What are your values? And then read and research and check your sources and make sure that they're credible. We've talked a lot on this series about misinformation and all of that. So, News Tech is a plugin that I really like, but make sure that the sources that you're referencing are credible. If it's articles on the web, read books by people who are in the space and have done the space a long time. And there's a bazillion recommendations out there right now. And one cheater way or efficient way is if you don't have time to read a lot of books right now. Blinkist is an app that kind of is the Cliff Notes version of the books. And I know it has White Fragility because I've read the Blink version of White Fragility on that, where you can get all of the key points of these books. Not all of them. Their library is robust, but it's not the best. In like condensed forms as like starter places. A lot of the authors that are more recent, go to YouTube. They do talks and talk about the concepts in their books. So you still can, get, as a starter place, like buy the books, support the authors, do the full research. But if that's something, in the short term where you want to start doing some research and, a stack of books of like, read these is intimidating, start with the blinks. Start with an hour video of these authors describing them, doing talks about them on YouTube if you can find those. And there's so many great articles right now too. And one thing, Instagram TV, you have so many different people just going live. You have Black friends talking to Black friends. You literally get to sit in on other people's conversations. I listened to a few over the weekend, and I'll mention it some, but there's no better time right now to sit in on other people's conversations and just listen what they're saying and listen into as many as you can, because one conversation isn't representative of everyone. So same thing with social media. One customer or fan interaction isn't representative of the whole community. So get on Instagram TV. There's some great, and there's so many lives and webinars right now too. And for the white people, talk to other folks about whiteness. Do not burden your Black friends with these conversations. They've got a full plate right now, just dealing with everything, and they don't need to comfort you for your white shame and guilt and you trying to prove like, well, I'm not racist because da 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 da, or that we have this, at least for me, I know it's like I want to make sure that I'm doing the right thing and showing up, but do the work yourself. Start with that work yourself. And if you need help or guidance or want perspective outside of your own, start with your other white friends. Like, do all the work and burden on yourself. It's up to white people created racism, or like the infrastructure and everything around it. It's our job to fix it, and to educate ourselves about it. And not to burden our Black friends about this. I think, I forget the guy's name. He's this activist Black chef, and he did these dinner series across the US, and where it was talking about racism, and he'd get a bunch of people together, and I just saw the talk about this, where he was talking about it, and you'd have white people at this table of, about racism and Black conversation. They're like, oh, this is great, let's fix racism. And then look to the Black person sitting beside them like, so what do we do? That is not how to approach this at all. So keep that in mind. And then from an organization level, we've spoken so much about values here at Sociality Squared because they're so important. And whether it's organizations or personal, like, you have to lean into them. What are your values? And we talk about value alignment. So your core business values, what are they? What are your actions, and how aligned are they? If they're not aligned and somewhere in the middle, because this is life, your ideals and where you want to be aren't aligned, well, what can you do to get them the most aligned? And you can start with what's one action item that you can state, that you can take and communicate with it. That goes for individuals and organizations too. And if the values aren't what you want them to be, reevaluate the values. If your actions don't align with them, evaluate those. And another thing too, specifically on the organizational level, because there's a lot that you can do on that front, is there are experts in this field that specialize in diversity and inclusion. Hire them. They're there to for their expertise. I mean, we do social media audits, and one of the things I say on that front is, like, you just don't know what you don't know, and especially when it comes to racism and how to be anti-racist, use experts to fill the gaps, help you fill in those blind spots of what you don't know. So that is the main thing I want to talk about today, of finding clarity through action. Don't get stuck in your head. Don't get worried about what you should do. Do what you can. And if you're very new to this, start with reflecting for yourself, doing the research, and then connecting with other white people if you're white, and talking about whiteness. And then for organizations to reflect on your values and align your business practices with your values. Okay, that took up a little bit of time, but I want to talk about a few articles and things really quick too, in terms of the roundup. One really good webinar that I watched, hosted by Wethos and presented by two people who do this work, Adriele Parker and Susan Jane. Really great start for both personals and professionals and organizations, called Learning and Leading in Times of Trauma: How to Establish an Anti-Racist Workplace. The recording of it is available for watching, so I'd recommend watching that, and I'll share the link afterwards, as I always do with all the links. Another article, well, there was a few, like, your Black colleagues may not be okay, or say they're okay, or look okay, chances are they're not. And a friend of mine, Natasha A Holiday, who's Black, she shared one of her personal experiences on RBC Capital Markets blog. She's the director there, and she was, I forget what year, I might have been maybe a sophomore, and she was senior. Anyway, I think I said last time is a bit of a blur. I'm not the best with dates and years of when things happen, but she's always been this, like, powerful force for good, and she was the president of our student body one of the years when we were students at Xavier University, and she's now managing director at RBC Capital Markets. And she's so involved in the community. She's on the board of Xavier, and her husband are such rock stars. They host what they call the holiday party with their last names and raise money for different nonprofits every winter season. And she shared a personal story on their blog, which they amplified, which I'll link to because it's really good to just share a personal experience that is a lived experience of so many people that, you know, those with white privilege just can't relate to, which is also heartbreaking. And one of the things that she put in the article is, you know, some things that usually take her an hour are now taking her 3 hours. You know, when we first went into the coronavirus, there were tons of articles on, you know, people adjusting with the new work-life balance and we said this, and I still say this, you know, everyone needs to give each other grace right now, and we need to especially extend that grace to our Black friends and family and colleagues. Another thing kind of along this lines is Facebook is paying a $52 million settlement to moderators who developed PTSD on the job. There's been a lot of articles about the mental labor of moderating content that's farmed out by these third-party vendors that Facebook pays, that's watching disturbing content. And when I saw that article, like, it's heartbreaking, and it's one of these, you know, we haven't figured out the best way of how to deal with this, like between AI and humans and all of this. We're still kind of wading through those waters. But one of the things that I immediately thought of is we're watching a lot of this, like you and I are watching a lot of really disturbing content over the last couple of weeks. And depending on how closely you've been following this, there's just years and decades, but there is just more being filmed and the accessibility of things being filmed. So I just wanted to also, you know, in the vein of giving yourself grace, also check in on yourself. Like, how are you doing? And if you need help, seek it out. Like the fact that Facebook is paying $52 million in a settlement with moderators because of PTSD from seeing disturbing content on a regular basis as part of their job. Like, we also need to take care of our own mental health, whether that's limiting the news and finding a balance where you can stay informed, but guard your mental health, or, you know, especially for people sharing content that is, you know, that's a whole nother can of worms, but if it is disturbing, to make sure that there's like trigger warnings and disturbing content filters so people can figure out if they want to, you know, watch that content or not, or if they're ready or in a position where they can. So I just want to mention that, like, take care of yourself, seek help if needed. Few other quick things. I know we're at the 30-minute mark. Alexis Ohanian steps down from the board of Reddit. So Alexis Ohanian is the co-founder of Reddit. He is also the husband to Serena Williams. And this was one of those Instagram TV conversations that I sat in on over the weekend. And they did a live, she does every Saturday, she does Serena Saturdays to talk about fashion and culture and all this other stuff. And this one was kind of a special episode because Alexis was her guest to talk about the decision for him to step down from the board. And for him, it was an action that he could take and kind of model in terms of stepping down and really urging the board to replace him with a Black candidate. And they've actually already done that. Y Combinator CEO Michael Siebel is filling that in. So in terms of like we've seen over the last couple of weeks a lot of different companies state different things about Black Lives Matter, how they're standing with community. And I think the strongest ones are certainly the ones that come with action and concrete steps. And this was a pretty bold one on his part, so I applaud him for that. And I don't know if I'll have to check before and see if I can find the link if their conversation is saved on her Instagram TV page on Instagram. But one thing that they shared is like, well, he was cute. He was like, he said many times on the show that he has the privilege of being married to Serena Williams. So I thought that was cute. But they have a lot of conversations about the different perspectives that they bring in the relationship and how they are comfortable with being uncomfortable. And that was something that stuck with me. And I think that's something in any relationship, but just being comfortable with being uncomfortable right now. So that it was cute. It was more than cute, but it was good. And something else, if you might have seen, Share the Mic Now happened yesterday, where a lot of celebrities shared, like literally handed over, I think it was all women actually, 47 women handed over their larger followings and larger platforms to have Black women share their lives and their stories and magnify Black voices. So that was really great to see. And if you search for that hashtag, you'll probably see some of those stories. And I think that's such a great way in terms, or whoever the organizers are of that, to, pass as the share the mic, pass the mic. So that on the social media front. And then just again, I mean, we're still in the middle of a pandemic. And we just have to also stay super vigilant on the content that we're seeing and reading and sharing. And there's a lot of tensions right now and a lot of confusions across the board, coronavirus, racism. So just on your end, always check what sources, are they valid sources? What are you amplifying? And the reasons why you're amplifying it, and just always be super vigilant on that front. And for the inspiration section, there's something that I shared on my personal Facebook page yesterday. Let me pull it up because I don't have it up right this second. But I came across this gentleman. Actually, his book Freedom Dreams was recommended in one of the webinars that I attended. Robin D.G. Kelly, and I was looking him up on YouTube, and he's really interesting, and I'm really excited to read his book. And I found this interview that he did on this documentary, Through a Lens Darkly, and it's 12 minutes. I'll share the link to it, but it's really it's a really good interview, and he packs so much information in just 12 minutes. But it looks at the history of Black photographers, and really it speaks to the power of photography, both for good and for bad too. And he describes the first Black photographers that really, one of the things that he says in the interview is like, it's the first time that they possess themselves and re-represent themselves in their lives in Black culture. So it's really good. I'm very involved in photography. We helped launch Like a Camera on social media and worked with them for 5.5 years. We're working with the Leica Society now. We've worked with them since 2016. I'm an amateur hobbyist photographer. But we see images, we see video and moving image, and we know the power. And this just gives a very beautiful lens into the history of early Black photographers and the first professional Black photographers and what their images meant during that time. So I'll share that link too, and really recommend it. So that is it for today. I'm a little over. Thank you for sticking with me. Yeah, thank you again for joining. Stay vigilant, stay safe, and I'll see you next week at the same time.